My traveling American Life in Columns tour and speech, which pre-pandemic seems like ages ago. You'll remember that I delivered those remarks in 24 cities, small theaters all across the country. It preceded the pandemic-shortened Things I Wish I Knew Before I Started Talking tour. But when it was American Life in Columns, the totality of which is still posted on my YouTube page, I used to try and end, having discussed polarization, the divide, how we got where we are. I used to try and end on a happy note, on an upbeat note, and I would do so by quoting data from an academic at Stanford named Morris Fiorina. Because Morris Fiorina in 2017 had written a book called Unstable Majorities, Polarization, Party Sorting, and Political Stalemate. And Dr. Fiorina, who has been a guest of mine on SiriusXM POTUS, found that the nation is no more politically divided now than we were in the 1970s. That, despite how things appear in the news, that the parties and the politicians, oh yeah, they're much more divided. And of course, the media has completely sorted itself. But Americans on core issues, when you compare where we stand today versus where we stood in the 1970s, not so much change. I buy into that data. I buy into the logic of it. My view is largely anecdotal, based on hosting a radio program for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, 15 hours of interaction. And that's why I'm thrilled that now stepping into the fold is Dr. Todd Rose. Dr. Rose is a former Harvard neuroscientist, a prominent media figure. He now has a think tank that's called Populace. They're based in Boston. They've pioneered some new social science and methodology in private opinion polling, and they have just launched what they're calling the American Aspirations Index. I think you're going to be heartened by the result. This is Dr. Todd Rose. Dr. Rose, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So what makes your methodology different than the rest?
So look, public opinion has a lot of value, but as everybody knows, social influence distorts public opinion, right? Like what I'm willing to say is not just what I believe all the time. So this methodology does two things. One, it provides a level of anonymity that makes it so that it's not clear what it is that's being asked of you. The second thing is that it also, like with something like the future of the country or things that matter, you can't have everything. It's about trade-offs. So it's not enough to say, do you care about healthcare? I want to know what you're willing to trade off for it. And so this methodology called conjoint allows us to get at beyond social pressure, looking at private opinion in trade-off priorities for the future of the country.
I read the report. It's about a 40-page report. It's in my Twitter feed right now so that others can read it as well. And I was thinking this is sort of the ranked choice voting style of survey research. Is that a fair characterization? Because you were continually asking people to prioritize.
That's right. And so, and what this does, one step beyond ranked choice, is that if you were taking this survey, rather than say, do you care about, again, healthcare or individual rights, you would get a series of questions that says, listen, here's country A, country B, and we would randomly generate like 6 attributes for each one out of a list of 55 and say, which one's closer to your ideal America? And we do that over and over again, and allows us to systematically compare every attribute against every other attribute.
82% of Americans personally believe the country is more divided than united. 41% believe the country is extremely divided. Are they correct?
They are not.
Okay, convince us.
So, we can understand the sentiment, but this is where private opinion methodology allows us to get beyond what our initial impression is. So if you just look at, out of the 55 possible things you could want for the future of the country, and you look across demographics, for example, race, class, gender, geography, generation, we actually share 8 out of the top 10 in common of our most important things we could possibly want for the future of the country. Even in our politics, which are actually the place where we're seeing divisions at all, but they're not nearly what you think. even there, out of the top 15, Trump voters and Biden voters share 9 out of the 15 in common. So it's just the only difference in politics is the places we disagree, we really, really disagree on just a few things, but it's being interpreted as widespread disagreement.
Well, am I oversimplifying if I say that based on your research, it seems like we all want to get to the same place, but we're disagreeing on the mode of transportation? Because we certainly disagree on policy, right?
Yeah, so this is the thing. And by the way, you're hitting on something really important. It's perfectly okay to disagree on how to get there, right? That's what a democracy is for. It's what we were trying to understand is, are we only divided in the means of getting there, or do we not even agree on the North Star? Because that's a more difficult place to be. Here's the thing. We weren't trying to find common ground. If we were divided, so be it, right? We just can't deal with misunderstanding. But what we find is we have shocking levels of agreement about where we want the country to go, and then we can debate, right? So, for example, high quality healthcare for everyone is a top 3 priority no matter how you cut the data. For Trump voters, Biden voters, African Americans, Asians, Gen Zers, whatever. So let's debate what the best way to provide everyone with healthcare is. The thing that I found most interesting is there's still an incredible commitment to egalitarian kind of classical American values like individual rights, equal treatment, having a fair shot and equal opportunity, which I think is still heartening.
I was surprised that cutting across, and you correct me if I'm wrong or if I misinterpreted the data, but cutting across all demographics, the number one priority, the number one aspiration of all Americans is the preservation of, continuation of individual rights.
Yeah, we that shocked me given the public narrative. I thought it would be way more polarized. It's not. In fact, we did this for a year and a half, and this final survey was actually the 4th time we went national to see this, and that finding was always true, no matter how often we looked at it. We even reran this right after the attack on the Capitol just to make sure that didn't change anything. Look, people care a lot about individual rights.
I would
It's
have
just
said I would have said that was true of red state America. I would not have expected Joe Biden voters to prioritize individual rights. And similarly, number 3 on the list after healthcare was climate change. I would have said, well, that's a blue state priority. That's not a red state priority. And just to be clear, you're saying that there's agreement on those 3 national long-term priorities: individual rights, quality health care, climate change.
Yeah, the climate change one, I actually, when I first saw the day, I said, that can't be right. You know what I mean? Just because I had bought into the narrative. I will tell you, in talking to Republican after Republican, this is the thing that shows up. They say, you know what? I actually believe that. I just didn't realize other people did on the right. And let me tell you where this is important. So, one of the things we study is what we call collective illusions, which are places where the majority in America actually agrees on something, but they don't realize that they're a majority. So let's take climate change. In aggregate, it is the number 3 rank order priority. Again, in private opinion, you can't game this. This is what people care about. But it is perceived to be only 33rd by the majority. So think about that. Like, we actually care about it, but we think people don't care about it. Well, guess what? Your perception of the majority is going to govern collective action more than anything else. So we have a problem. It is that we do not understand each other, not that we are deeply divided.
Okay, so if the agreement exists on individual rights, quality health care, and climate change, what are those? I think you said, 6 or so out of the top 15 where we really disagree.
So where we really disagree, this won't be surprising. So the disagreements sort of track with public opinion, which is we disagree on immigration. Just fundamentally disagree. So just looking at the data here, when you look at severely restricting immigration is a top 5 priority for Trump voters, but it is the 46th priority for Biden voters. Okay, so that's about as big of a disagreement as you're going to get. Okay, fine, right? You also see it with respect to a living wage, which is a higher priority for Biden voters, and it is not a priority for Trump voters. The other piece where there's strong disagreement is with respect to national security, border security. right? So this tracks pretty typically. But again, we have unbelievable disagreement there. But when you ask people, they believe it reflects widespread disagreement. Like one of the things we asked in this that didn't make it in the report, but it was just in our development work, was we asked Trump voters and Biden voters whether the other side just disagreed, like you said, on the means of getting somewhere, or do we just not share each other's values anymore? And you had an overwhelming majority of Americans say the other side doesn't share my long-term values. That's just not true.
On those issues that are providing the country with a sense of urgency, is there agreement or disagreement? In other words, can we all agree on what the most pressing problem is today?
Yeah, what was interesting is in addition to the long-term aspirations, we did some extra questioning that got at, okay, what about the next few years, which I think is like political timeline. And we asked people, would you be upset if we didn't make progress on this particular item in the next few years? And so we layered that on with bipartisan support, with cross demographic support. And what you find is there are 5 things that we could do right now that are policy priorities that basically everybody cares about, right? So that they're this: healthcare, um, safe communities, criminal justice reform, which is fascinating to me, um, uh, helping the middle class, and infrastructure. Those are things which it doesn't matter how you cut the data, a majority of people care about it for the aspirations for the country. They think we're failing right now, and they'll be mad if you don't do something.
I buried the lead. You better speak to me before you leave me as to approach. How did you go about this? What's the sample size? Who are these people?
Mhm. So in the sample size, it's a couple of thousand, which is pretty normal for this size of a survey. We used YouGov, and we went by best in class sampling methods, making sure we're also oversampling on folks that often are underrepresented in these kind of surveys. So we feel really good about that, the data quality and the results, and then this added layer of private opinion, I think, gives it a new kind of set of insights. Mike, can I tell you one more thing that I think is just I think you'll love, just given who you are, what you do. So one of the things we absolutely agree on across, no matter how you cut the data, nobody cares about unity for its own sake. It's like literally like, because people viewed it as basically compromising on their values. If we don't agree, we don't agree. What they cared about was treating each other with respect. Like that is a top 15 priority for everybody. But back to these collective illusions, it's perceived as being number 36. So we
Mhm.
have this place where we don't need to agree on everything, but we do need to be civil, and we do need to treat each other with some dignity. And that's where everybody from Trump voters to Biden voters across all demographics, that's what we can agree on. We just don't think we agree.
Sum up. I am Dr. Todd Rose. I've just completed this body of research. Here's what I found.
Here's what I found: we are not even remotely as divided as we believe we are. And the thing holding us back from having a truly great society is that we are misunderstanding each other, not that we are divided on values.
You really don't get into causation. As I read the report, I thought it was a confirmation of everything I've been saying for years about how those with microphones in front of them are pursuing this divide, the idea of a divide for their own profit motive. We've been led to believe that there are great barriers between us when in fact there aren't.
That's right. And so, we thought it was important in this kind of report that we wanted to be a neutral arbiter of just private opinion. We, of course, have our own opinions. And so I would agree with you from an editorial standpoint that I think when people read this report, what you should ask yourself is who stands to benefit from these perceptions of divisions? And I think we'll get a long way in trying to solve some of them.
I mimicked one of your questions. I am asking my audience today, to what extent do you believe Americans are united or divided today? I've completely adopted your choices: extremely united, more united than divided, neutral, neither united nor divided, more divided than united, extremely divided. People will have to parse those at my website at smirconish.com, where I've also made your report available. So it'll be interesting because come tomorrow, I'll be able to compare your result with the audience that responds. Mine is not scientific, but it will be nonetheless very interesting to do a comparison of what result you found and what result I get from what I think is a pretty independently minded radio audience. Thank you so
I
much
think
for
it,
being here. I really, really appreciate your time.
thank you.